The single most unique championship in the history of the NBA. It was played in October at a neutral site with no fans at Disney World of all places, with no parade afterwards, no public celebration. The 2020 title will hopefully have no comparison for the rest of the history of the NBA. And because of that, there hasn't been much focus on the team that actually won the title in 2020. The LA Lakers. People called it a Mickey Mouse championship. They made fun of them winning in the bubble with no fans, but they still earned the right to call themselves NBA champions. And interestingly, that version of the Lakers completely fell apart to the point that you could barely recognize them within just a few seasons. So what happened to the 2020 LA Lakers? First, let's talk about how they got to the finals and won the title in the first place. For all of the weirdness that was the end of that season, people forget that the Lakers were really good that year. They finished as the 1 seed in the Western Conference. Them and the Clippers were playing the best towards the end of the season. They finished 1-2 in the official end of season standings, and LeBron finished second in MVP voting, and Anthony Davis was 6th. So obviously, their team was powered by their 2 superstars at the top of the roster, and most importantly, they were healthy for most of the season. They also had good depth around them. They kind of went the mercenary route in free agency and just grabbed a bunch of veteran guys on 1-year contracts. They had Rajon Rondo, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, Danny Green, Avery Bradley, KCP, and they also had some young guys like Alex Caruso and Kyle Kuzma. And looking back, there was actually a lot of depth on that roster around their top 2 guys in LeBron and Anthony Davis, and it's really not that much of a surprise that they were so good in the postseason. In the first round, they beat Damian Lillard and the Blazers in 5 after losing game 1. In the second round, they beat the Rockets in 5 after also once again losing game 1. That was the Houston team. They got really weird towards the end of the season. They traded away pretty much every big on their roster. They traded away Clint Capella because they had added Russell Westbrook in the prior offseason after trading away Chris Paul, and they just couldn't get the spacing to work around James Harden, so they just decided, let's just not play any big guys. And for the first game of that series, it looked like they were actually going to be a problem in the postseason. Ultimately, the Lakers' size and depth overwhelmed them, and they lose in the second round. Then you get to the conference finals, and they once again only go 5 games, this time against the Denver Nuggets, but it's a very young Nuggets team. Jamal Murray's 22 in that series, Nikola Jokic is 24 in that series, and obviously a couple years later, those guys end up winning an NBA title, but it's a much different Nuggets team. It wasn't fully Nikola Jokic yet, obviously. This was a version of the team that was still relying on guys like Paul Millsap, and this is also a Nuggets team that came back from down 3-1 against the Jazz in the first round against Donovan Mitchell and the Jazz, and came back from down 3-1 against the Clippers in the second round after the Clippers basically just quit on the bubble. They went there, they looked like one of the favorites. I personally thought the Clippers were going to win the NBA title going into the bubble in 2020. They're up 3-1. We think we're getting an LA versus LA showdown in the conference finals, and they completely collapse, and this Nuggets team ends up in the conference finals after back-to-back 3-1 series comebacks. But at the end of the day, the Lakers are just too experienced. They're just better, and the Nuggets just are not ready yet. They're too young, and the Lakers find themselves in the finals, and they get to the finals and they play this crazy 5-seed Heat team from the Eastern Conference that was on this wild run in the bubble. They look like, honestly, the best team there, frankly. But then they get to the finals, and the series was never really in doubt. The Lakers' size and depth and shooting at certain times really just overwhelmed them, and the Lakers end up winning the title in 2020. And we don't often think about this Lakers team this way, but they had an incredible postseason. They had 3 5-game series, 1 6-game series in the finals. They were 16-5 on their way to winning an NBA title, which if you look throughout the history of the league, it's not that often you have a team that does that well in the postseason on their way to winning a title. Now, one of the reasons that people don't really give them a ton of credit apart from the bubble and all that, no fans, is that the setup of the bubble worked really well for the Lakers, because if they had a flaw, it was that they were relying on a ton of older guys on their roster, and at the top of their roster, some injury-prone guys. LeBron wasn't necessarily injury-prone at that point in his career, but you're just getting older, you're always concerned about it, and Anthony Davis has always been injury-prone throughout his career, and so the setup of the bubble, where the league gets canceled and the season gets canceled in mid-March, and then we don't have the finals until October, all that time off in between restarting in the bubble and the season getting postponed in March helped the Lakers get healthy and get ready to go and have a veteran group that knew going into the bubble, we've got like 2 months of basketball to go and win a title, and that's all we have to pay attention to. We don't have to load manage through 82 games. We don't have to figure out who's going to be healthy. Everybody's healthy. Everybody's ready to go. And for LeBron and AD specifically, that was a massive advantage compared to a lot of other teams that would have been totally fine playing the season on from March had the season not gotten postponed. And at that point, once they win the NBA title, there's no reason to believe that they are not going to continue to contend over the next couple of seasons. They started to usher in not necessarily a new era, but a little bit of a new play style because the Lakers were so bruising and they were so big and physical. They rebounded well. They played Anthony Davis alongside a center a bunch, and then you had LeBron at the 3, and then when they wanted to go quote-unquote small, it was LeBron and AD in the front court, so they weren't small at all, and teams were starting to realize with this Lakers team, as well as with the rise of guys like Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid, that playing a little bit bigger was starting to work better going against some of these small ball lineups that these other teams had used. And you've got LeBron, you've got Anthony Davis, you've got Frank Vogel as head coach, a bunch of good role guys. So the thought is at the time they're going to continue to contend. The problem was that a bunch of roster turnover at the end of that season with a bunch of these back end of the roster veterans. Guys like JaVale McGee, Rajon Rondo, Dwight Howard, Danny Green, Avery Bradley. They moved on from all of those guys in one way or another and basically tried to do the exact same thing the following season by bringing in a bunch of veterans like Marc Gasol, Montrezl Harrell, Wes Matthews. They traded Danny Green for Dennis Schroeder to provide them a little bit more playmaking, and that set of veterans just didn't work nearly as well as the ones that they won the title with. And in the following 2020-21 season, it was very obvious that they just were not as good. The secret of the 2020 team was that they were so good on defense and they rebounded so well because they were a bigger team, and they were just kind of good enough on offense. They were an elite defense, and then they finished 11th in offensive rating in the regular season the year prior, although again, it was a suspended regular season, but still 11th is pretty solid when really your calling card is on defense. And then when we get to the postseason, their three-point shooting really leveled up. They had timely three-point shooting as well, and their role guys really started playing well from behind the three-point line because during the regular season, they were not a very good three-point shooting team, which made them incredibly difficult to beat. But the 2021 team finished the season 24th in offensive rating. They were still elite on defense, but they are one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the entire league, and they just could not score. And a large reason for that is that their stars just simply were not healthy. LeBron and Anthony Davis both missed a bunch of time, so they only went 42-30 in the regular season and lost in the first round to the Phoenix Suns. And as much as the bubble helped them win the title in 2020, the schedule following it with a shorter offseason, more games packed into a, shortened season, 72 games, but still more games in a smaller time period, really did not help the Lakers with the way they had put together their roster, which all leads to going into the postseason not healthy and ultimately not winning a single series, trying to defend their title. But it was clear that there was a lot of potential still with that team if they had stayed the course. There were certainly calls for shaking up the roster, potentially changing up the coach. There was a lot of things that people were asking for the Lakers to do, but realistically, looking back on it, that 2-year window from when the season gets suspended in 2020 to the end of the 21 season, things were so weird that you really shouldn't be making large decisions about how good your roster is in that time period. But unfortunately, that's exactly what the Lakers did. They overreacted to the prior year and changed things up completely. First and foremost, they made the Russell Westbrook trade. In comparison to a team in 2020 that revolved entirely around their two stars and a bunch of depth, the Lakers went more towards a path of adding a third star around Anthony Davis and LeBron James, with the mindset being if they had a third guy during the regular season to carry the team offensively, let LeBron rest more, let there not be as much offensive responsibility on LeBron and Anthony Davis, that those guys would be more healthy and more fresh in the postseason the way that they weren't the prior year. So the concept is you bring in that third guy and then things are easier and you upgrade your overall talent level. And LeBron and AD both were very much invested in bringing in Russell Westbrook to the team. So they traded Kyle Kuzma, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Montrezl Harrell, and a first for Russell Westbrook. And frankly, from the moment it happened, it was a complete disaster. The spacing did not work. Russ did not know how to play alongside Anthony Davis and LeBron as what should have been the third option on the team, but it's hard to be the third option on the team when you just can't shoot. He didn't help them on defense at all, and they had no depth left over. Like, as much as it felt like Kuzma and KCP were just kind of extra pieces at the end of the roster by the end of the 21 season, those guys were genuinely very helpful depth pieces, and they just traded him away for a version of the team that was just straight up worse than the year before. And speaking of depth, the other kind of sneaky thing that happened that offseason was they let Alex Caruso walk in free agency. They had two options basically in free agency that offseason. They could have prioritized Talen Horton-Tucker, or they could have prioritized Alex Caruso. Technically, they could have signed both guys, but with the way the money was working at the time, especially bringing in Russ, they didn't want to spend a ton of money on the back end of the roster, which is understandable. And ultimately, they chose to give Talen Horton-Tucker a new contract over someone like Alex Caruso. He goes on to Chicago, has a great career there, and now, as of this recording, is in Oklahoma City, and is exactly the kind of role player guy you would want alongside alongside LeBron and Anthony Davis, and especially with Russ there as well once you trade away your other depth, because Talen Horton-Tucker doesn't help them over the next couple of seasons. They thought he would develop into a nice perimeter scorer for them. He just didn't, and Caruso would have been perfect. So in one offseason, you basically lose all of your depth. You bring in a third star that doesn't fit your team at all, and that begins the downfall of the former version of the 2020 LA Lakers. After a disappointing first season with Russell Westbrook, they end up trading him in the following trade deadline in 2023, giving up even more assets, making the trade that much worse, giving up a first in the trade in the first place, plus your depth, then trading away draft assets just to get rid of them a year and a half later. And essentially at the time that trade happens, that's the end of the 2020 title team. They just completely misunderstood what made their team great. It was LeBron and Anthony Davis at the center of it, and it was role guys, and it was depth, and it was defense, and it was shooting. And frankly, a lot of the blame also needs to be put on LeBron and Anthony Davis for pushing for the Russell Westbrook trade in the first place. For all we know, the organization wanted to be patient that offseason. They realized that it was just a weird situation the prior year, and they were forced into it by LeBron and AD themselves. They wanted more star power, and that was the downfall of the team, because they just were not able to replace all the depth that they lost. Had they continued to go with the blueprint of that 2020 team, there's a realistic version of the team that allows them to continue to contend over the next couple of seasons. So what happened to the 2020 LA Lakers as of this recording? Well, first, LeBron is still on the team. AD was traded for Luka in 2025, one of the craziest trades in NBA history and sports history. KCP, as I mentioned, was traded for Russell Westbrook in 2021, as was Kyle Kuzma. Danny Green, as I mentioned, was traded for Dennis Schroeder in 2020, and he was okay for them, but just not exactly what they needed. JaVale McGee was traded to the Cavs in 2020 for Alfonso McKinney. Avery Bradley, Dwight Howard, and Rajon Rondo all left in free agency in 2020. Markieff Morris left in free agency in 2021. Alex Caruso, as I mentioned, ended up leaving in free agency. Talen Horton-Tucker, the guy they prioritized over Alex Caruso, was traded to the Jazz for Patrick Beverley in 2022 after not contributing much on his new contract. Dion Waiters never signed in the NBA after the 2020 season, nor did J.R. Smith. Quinn Cook was waived by them in 2020, came back, then waived again in 2021. And Jared Dudley retired from the NBA after spending the 2021 season with the Lakers again. So essentially, every player on the roster, as of this recording, left in free agency or was traded, other than LeBron. LeBron is basically the only piece left on the roster, and that is what happened to the 2020 LA Lakers.